In December 2000, a man set out for a hunting trip on Lake Seminole in Florida. By nightfall, he had vanished. His mother's persistence eventually revealed a web of lies, a secret affair, and a profit scheme. Jerry Michael "Mike" Williams was born on October 16, 1969, in Bradfordville, Florida, north of Tallahassee. He was the son of Jerry Jerome Williams, a Greyhound bus driver, and Cheryl Williams, who ran a daycare. From a young age, Mike stood out both in academics and in his ability to connect with people. At North Florida Christian High School, he was not only an outstanding student, but also served as student body president, earning the admiration of his classmates, who voted him best personality. In addition to his academic achievements, Mike was a talented athlete, excelling on the football field. At the age of 15, he developed a love for duck hunting, a pastime that would become one of his lifelong passions. His dedication extended beyond sports and hobbies. He had a clear vision for his future. After graduating high school, Mike attended Florida State University, where he pursued a degree in political science and urban planning, determined to build a successful and meaningful career. It was during his teenage years that Mike met Denise Merrill, a vibrant cheerleader who captured the hearts of many and was later crowned homecoming queen. The two began dating in high school, and their relationship blossomed over the years. Their romance eventually led to marriage in 1994, solidifying their bond. In 1999, their joy expanded with the birth of their daughter, Ansley. Following his graduation from Florida State University, he began working for the Ketchum Appraisal Group as a property appraiser. His tireless work ethic quickly became well known. Mike often put in 15-hour days, determined to excel in his profession and secure a comfortable life for his wife and daughter. The Williams family lived in an upscale subdivision on the east side of Tallahassee, surrounded by a community that admired their seemingly perfect life. Their home was a reflection of their hard work and shared dreams. Mike and Denise had even begun making plans to expand their family and had talked about traveling to Hawaii to celebrate their 6th wedding anniversary. The future appeared bright, full of promise and excitement. Yet, beneath the surface of this picture-perfect life, an unseen shadow loomed. Mike could not have known that danger was drawing closer, nor that the plans and dreams he held so dearly were about to be shattered. On December 16, 2000, 31-year-old Mike told Denise that he wants to go duck hunting, but would be home in time for their planned vacation. The couple had been looking forward to a trip to Apalachicola, Florida, to celebrate their 6th wedding anniversary. However, when noon arrived, and Denise still had not heard from her husband, her concern quickly grew. She began calling friends to see if anyone had seen or heard from Mike and asked for their help in locating him. Wasting no time, she also contacted the police, and a search for Mike was immediately set into motion. The search unfolded over several hours, but daylight soon faded, making the task more difficult. Even in the darkness, searchers made a discovery. Mike's small, motorized canoe was found along the shore of Lake Seminole. Not far from the water, about 75 yards away, they located his Ford Bronco. The vehicle appeared to be parked neatly, but there was no trace of Mike himself. The scene raised many questions, but offered no clear answers. The authorities continued their search in the days, weeks, and eventually months that followed. Their efforts turned up several of Mike's belongings. His hunting license, jacket, and waders were recovered from the bottom of Lake Seminole, leading the investigators to believe that he may have drowned. Operating under that assumption, the police expected his body to surface within a few days, as often happens in drowning cases. When days passed without a body being recovered, suspicion grew, but the investigators found an explanation they deemed plausible. Lake Seminole was known to have a large alligator population, and the police theorized that it was possible Mike had been attacked and consumed by the animals. The lack of a body or additional evidence meant the case could go no further at that time, and it was officially classified as a missing person investigation. For years, the case remained stagnant, with no new leads or breakthroughs. Mike's absence weighed heavily on those who knew him, but the official investigation made little progress and eventually went cold. 6 months after Mike's disappearance, Denise petitioned Leon's circuit judge to have him declared legally deceased. The judge granted her request, formalizing the declaration. Denise later told friends and family that she fully believed Mike was gone. The man who had once been her high school sweetheart and devoted husband was, in the eyes of the law, no longer alive, though the truth about what had really happened to him remained hidden. As the official investigation stalled, Mike's mother, Cheryl Williams, refused to accept the conclusion that her son had drowned in Lake Seminole. She firmly believed that Mike was alive and that the truth behind his disappearance had yet to be uncovered. Determined to find answers, she took matters into her own hands, pursuing leads on her own, speaking to people connected to the case, and even cross-checking their stories. Cheryl conducted an independent investigation, gathering information and refusing to let her son's case be forgotten. Her relentless efforts eventually made an impact. In 2010, a decade after Mike vanished, the authorities reclassified his disappearance as a suspicious demise. The case was reopened and assigned to a team of cold case investigators. This decision was heavily influenced by Cheryl's persistence and the new pieces of information that she had uncovered over the years. The new investigators began re-examining the evidence and interviewed witnesses with fresh eyes, determined to find out whether foul play had been involved. One of the most significant findings was financial. The police learned that following Mike's disappearance, Denise had received $1.75 million from his life insurance policies. Adding to their concerns, they discovered that in 2005, Denise had married Brian Winchester, Mike's best friend. This revelation deepened suspicions about whether Mike's demise was an accident at all. The investigators began to question many aspects of the original inquiry and whether key details had been overlooked. When the cold case team reviewed the circumstances surrounding the recovery of Mike's boat, several troubling inconsistencies emerged. The boat's engine was found switched off, yet its gas tank was still full. According to the manufacturer, if the engine had been running when Mike fell overboard, it should have continued running until the fuel was used up. This suggested that someone had deliberately turned off the engine. There were also questions about Mike's behavior on the day he disappeared. Friends and family told the investigators that Mike almost never hunted alone, yet he had supposedly gone to the lake without a companion that morning. The location of his truck also raised red flags. It was parked in an area that would have required him to drag his boat through mud, even though there was a nearby concrete ramp that would have made launching much easier. The recovery of Mike's waders, jacket, and flashlight added another layer of suspicion. These items were found at the bottom of the lake, mixed with torn weeds and alligator excrement, shortly after his disappearance. However, the cold case investigators began to suspect that the items may have been intentionally placed there to reinforce the drowning theory. Despite these troubling discoveries, there was still no physical evidence or DNA linking anyone to Mike's disappearance, leaving the case shrouded in uncertainty. A major breakthrough came 6 years later, in 2016, when years of unanswered questions finally began to unravel. By that time, Denise and Brian had separated, and Denise had filed for divorce. She no longer wanted to be with him, but their relationship took a darker turn that summer. In the early hours of August 5, 2016, at around 2:30 a.m., Brian hid in the trunk of Denise's SUV. When she opened it, she found him armed with a gun. The tense situation only ended when Denise promised to stay with him. Immediately afterward, she went to the police and filed a kidnapping report, setting in motion a chain of events that would finally expose the truth about Mike's fate. Brian was arrested and questioned in relation to the kidnapping. During the interrogation, the investigators also asked him about Mike's disappearance. It was then that Brian made a shocking confession. The day that Mike was reported missing, he had been with him on the lake and knew exactly what had happened. He admitted that he had shot Mike. This confession opened the door for the prosecutors to push for justice in a case that had been cold for over a decade. Believing that Denise had also been involved in Mike's demise, the prosecutors faced a challenge. Without Brian's testimony, the lack of physical evidence would make convicting her nearly impossible. They offered Brian a plea deal. He would receive immunity from prosecution for Mike's slaying in exchange for testifying against Denise. In return, he would be sentenced to 20 years in prison, but only for the kidnapping charge. Brian accepted the deal, agreeing to tell the full story and lead the police to Mike's remains. True to his word, Brian directed the investigators to the location of Mike's body. It was found exactly where he had said it would be, along the shores of Carr Lake in Leon County, near Tallahassee. The remains revealed that Mike had been shot in the head. This discovery brought long-awaited closure to the mystery of his disappearance, though it also confirmed the violent reality of his demise. Denise was arrested and charged with conspiracy to end a life, first-degree slaying, and being an accessory after the fact. The prosecutors argued that Mike's demise was the result of a deliberate plan carried out by both Brian and Denise. While Brian had pulled the trigger, they claimed the crime had been orchestrated together, motivated by their secret romantic relationship and the nearly $2 million in life insurance they stood to gain. During the trial, Brian testified in detail about the origins of the plan. He claimed the idea came to him during a hunting trip with Mike, when Mike accidentally fell into a mud hole. The ground had collapsed beneath him, trapping him like quicksand, and Brian had helped him escape. Later, he told Denise about the incident, remarking that if he had not been there to help, Mike would likely have lost his life, and no one would have ever known what happened. According to the prosecutors, this conversation marked the beginning of a fatal conspiracy that would end with Mike's life being ended on Lake Seminole. Brian testified about his relationship with Denise, saying, "We were Bonnie and Clyde. We were partners in crime." Denise suggested staging a boating accident on the Gulf of Mexico where they could throw both Mike and Brian's wife, Kathy Thomas, overboard. But Brian did not want to end the life of his children's mother. In December 2018, both Denise Williams and Brian Winchester were convicted on all counts. 2 months later, in February 2019, Denise was sentenced to life in prison plus an additional 30 years. 5 months after Denise's sentencing, a legal arrangement shifted the financial outcome of the case. Mike and Denise's daughter, Ansley, was awarded all assets from her late father's estate, as well as the life insurance proceeds that had originally gone to Denise. This transfer occurred after Denise signed over the funds to avoid prosecution on 3 counts of insurance fraud. The agreement stipulated that Ansley could not use any of the money to cover her mother's legal fees. If she violated this condition, she would be required to pay a $150,000 penalty to the state. Following her conviction, Denise was sent to the Florida Women's Reception Center to begin serving her sentence. Her legal team, however, continued to challenge the outcome. In January 2020, Denise filed an appeal with the Florida First District Court of Appeal, arguing through her attorney that there was insufficient evidence to prove that she had been involved in the actual commission of Mike's crime. The appeal brought a partial victory for Denise in November 2020. While the court upheld her conviction for conspiracy to end a life, along with the 30-year sentence that accompanied it, it overturned her first-degree slaying conviction. This decision significantly reduced her legal liability for the crime itself, though it did not set her free. In April 2021, the legal battle continued when Florida's Attorney General sought to challenge the reversal of the conviction. The state petitioned the Florida Supreme Court, citing conflicting legal precedents and state constitutional provisions in an effort to have the conviction reinstated. However, the Supreme Court declined to hear the case, effectively leaving the appellate court's ruling in place. With that decision, Denise remained convicted only of conspiracy to end a life, serving a 30-year sentence for her role in the plot that ended Mike's life. While the slaying conviction had been set aside, the court's decision ensured that her part in the scheme, and the betrayal of her husband, remained a matter of legal record. The long and tangled case had finally reached its legal conclusion, though the emotional toll on all involved, particularly Mike's family, was immeasurable. Mike's mother said the following after the verdict: "When I go to bed at night and I try to go to sleep, I see Michael clinging to that stump in the lake, and I hear him calling, 'Help! Help!'" In December 1994, Long Branch, New Jersey police entered an apartment to a harrowing scene. A woman's body was found, and her 2 young children were found unharmed nearby. Another crime would happen 6 months later. The two cases, linked by family ties, would haunt the Long Branch community for decades. Ana Mejia was born around 1969. She had a close bond with her family, especially her sister, Dolores Mejia, a relationship that remained constant throughout her life. By her mid-20s, Ana was a devoted mother to 2 young children, aged 1 and 3. She lived in a modest apartment on Prospect Street in Long Branch, New Jersey, where she balanced the demands of caring for her children with the responsibilities of running her household. On December 8, 1994, 24-year-old Ana was found deceased in the bedroom of her apartment. Her 2 young children, aged 1 and 3, were found inside the home unharmed. The authorities determined that she had been stabbed multiple times, and a white powdery substance was discovered on her face. This substance was later identified as baby formula. For Ana's loved ones, the violence was unimaginable, and the questions it raised offered little comfort. The crime was investigated, but even in its early stages, no clear suspect emerged. The presence of her children, unharmed but witnesses to their mother's final moments, only deepened the tragedy. As the investigators worked to understand the motive, the case quickly became one of the most disturbing in Long Branch's history. Just 5 months later, on May 14, 1995, another devastating blow struck the same family. Nicholas Connors, 51 years old and the husband of Dolores, Ana's sister, was shot multiple times in the head. His wife discovered his body after returning home from her job at a nursing home in Freehold. The violence was swift and fatal, echoing the suddenness of Ana's case and leaving the family reeling from a second loss in less than a year. The two cases were quickly linked by the investigators. The connection was clear. Ana was the sister of Nicholas's wife, and Nicholas had been Ana's brother-in-law. Law enforcement publicly acknowledged the possibility of a link between the cases, yet no names were released as potential suspects. As months turned to years, the cases grew cold, leaving nearly 22 years of uncertainty for a family who had already endured the unimaginable twice. The long-awaited breakthrough came when the case was reopened in 2017 by a newly formed cold case squad. Years of unanswered questions finally began to yield new leads. By January 2020, the authorities announced the arrest of 66-year-old Dolores Morgan, her 47-year-old son Theodore Ted Connors, and 48-year-old Jose R. Carrero. Dolores being the sister of Ana and wife of Nicholas, and Ted being Nicholas's adoptive son. The investigators said that they had linked all 3 to the fatal cases of Ana and Nicholas. According to reports at the time, both Connors and Carrero had confided in several friends about the crimes. The turning point in the investigation was the discovery of a previously overlooked transcript from September 1995. This document captured a recorded conversation between Connors and a friend, in which the subject of the crimes was discussed. In addition, late in 2019, some of the suspects' friends came forward with new statements to the police, further strengthening the case. In January 2020, a grand jury indicted Morgan and Connors on 2 counts each of first-degree slaying. The prosecutors alleged that the mother and son were central figures in orchestrating the crimes, with Carrero assisting in carrying it out. The state's narrative was that Ana's crime had been an act of retribution, fueled by the belief that she, as a confidential informant, was preparing to betray Morgan by setting up her substance-dealing boyfriend. The prosecutors alleged that Nicholas's life was ended over a $200,000 life insurance policy that Morgan collected after his demise. The prosecution's theory held that Morgan had directed both fatal attacks, with Connors and Carrero acting as her enforcers. They argued that Ana's cooperation with law enforcement posed a serious threat to Morgan's interests, and Nicholas's demise followed as part of the broader scheme. The defense, however, pushed back hard, questioning the credibility of the state's cooperating witnesses and dismissing the testimony as the work of a self-serving snitch seeking personal gain. After a weeks-long trial in October 2021, the jury failed to reach a unanimous verdict, leading the judge to declare a mistrial. The outcome meant no resolution for the families or the community, But the prosecutors quickly announced their intention to retry the case, keeping the decades-old pursuit of justice alive. In 2024, the third defendant, Jose R. Carrero, chose to resolve his case by pleading to lesser charges. As part of his agreement, he cooperated with the prosecutors and admitted to conspiring with the others in relation to ending the life of Anna. Consistently described in coverage as a cooperating co-defendant, Carrero's testimony had been central to the state's case. That same year, he was sentenced to 14 years in state prison, marking the only substantial incarceration among the three defendants. For Dolores Morgan and Theodore Connors, the legal outcome was far different. Following the hung jury in the 2021 trial and a lengthy period of pre-retrial negotiations, both ultimately avoided slaying convictions. In 2024, they pleaded guilty to hindering, a charge significantly less severe than the original counts they faced. The decision marked a sharp turn in a case that had once been framed as a pursuit of justice for two cases. By February 2024, a judge indicated that he would not impose any additional prison time on Morgan and Connors. Instead, he signaled his intent to sentence them to time served, recognizing the years they had already spent in custody during the legal process. For some, the shift in charges and the expected outcome raised questions about the strength of the state's evidence and the compromises often made in complex, decades-old prosecutions. When sentencing took place in April 2024, Morgan and Connors were given probationary sentences. Both walked out of court that day, leaving behind the charges that had shadowed them for years. For them, the case was over in a legal sense, but for others, the resolution felt incomplete. In October 1995, the burnt-out shell of a white Mazda van was discovered on the central coast of New South Wales in Australia. Another crime would take place, but a resolution would only take place decades later. Ronald Richard Penn was born in 1936. His family base was in Inverell, a town in northern New South Wales. However, Ronald often found himself on the move, traveling back and forth to Wyong on the central coast of New South Wales. Ronald was known as a big man, both in physical stature and in personality. He carried himself with a presence that made him stand out, and people around him recognized that he was not someone who could be easily intimidated. In 1995, Ronald became directly involved in a serious legal matter. He was due to give evidence in relation to an apprehended violence order. His role in this case was critical, as he stood as a key witness who could provide important testimony in a violent dispute. The significance of his expected appearance in court placed him in a position of responsibility that carried real weight. When 61-year-old Ronald failed to return home as expected, his family immediately grew concerned. His absence was unusual and troubling, and those closest to him could not ignore the sense that something was wrong. Their unease eventually led them to take formal action by filing a missing person report with the police. Once alerted, the police authorities began their investigation into Ronald's disappearance. Their task was to determine what had happened to him and why he had not appeared in court. The investigation quickly focused on his last known movements and the people connected to him at the time. During their inquiries, the police learned that Ronald had last been seen at a home in Bateau Bay. This location was significant, as he was expected to attend court soon afterward. However, he never arrived at the courthouse, and his unexplained absence raised alarm about what might have taken place between the time he was last seen and the time he was expected to appear. The search for answers continued until October 1995, when the investigators made a chilling discovery. Ronald's white Mazda van was found burnt out in bushland near Berkeley Vale. The site of the vehicle was only a few kilometers from the home in Bateau Bay, where he had last been seen alive, making the discovery all the more disturbing. Inside the destroyed vehicle, the police found some of Ronald's personal documents and belongings. Rather than offering reassurance, these items heightened concerns. The condition of the van and the presence of his personal effects pointed toward the likelihood of foul play, deepening the suspicion that Ronald's disappearance was not voluntary and that something far more sinister had occurred. On November 21, 1995, violence struck at the Wyong courthouse, where the same AVO hearing Ronald had been scheduled to attend was taking place. As a 24-year-old woman, Jennifer Forgach arrived to attend the matter. She was shot and seriously injured. Although she survived the attack, the incident shocked the community and intensified questions about the dangerous circumstances surrounding the case. At the scene, the police quickly arrested a 24-year-old man and charged him with attempted slaying and firearms offenses. However, when the matter went to trial, the accused was acquitted on the grounds of mental illness. Even with this outcome, the shooting underscored the volatile nature of the dispute and raised concerns about the safety of others connected to the case. Given the timing and the shared link to the AVO hearing, the investigators turned their attention to a possible connection between Ronald's disappearance and the courthouse shooting. The police believed that the two cases could not be separated, as Ronald was expected to testify in the same matter. The working suspicion became that Ronald's life may have been ended deliberately to silence him and prevent his evidence from being heard. For years, the police dedicated resources to uncovering the truth. Strike Force Rank More was established to focus solely on solving Ronald's disappearance. The investigators conducted numerous searches in the bushland around Bateau Bay and Berkeley Vale, areas already tied to his last known movements. Despite these efforts, Ronald's body was never located, leaving the case unresolved and his family without answers. In May 2014, nearly 2 decades after he vanished, the police acted on new information. Specialist search officers and a cadaver dog were deployed to the Tagara Lakes area in the hope of finding Ronald's remains. The renewed search brought brief hope, but once again, no trace of him was discovered. The absence of physical evidence continued to weigh heavily on both the investigators and Ronald's loved ones. Then, in 2015, a breakthrough came when the police arrested Graham Thomas Sales. He was charged with ending the life of Ronald, as well as the attempted slaying relating to the Wyong courthouse shooting of Jennifer. Sales admitted to soliciting his younger brother, Ross Alfred Shane Sales, to end the life of Jennifer. Sales is already serving a 37-year jail term for the reign of terror he waged against his domestic partners and others between 1988 and his arrest in 2015. 5 years later, in May 2020, Sales pleaded guilty to both cases by saying, "Guilty, thank you." His admission closed the legal chapter of the cold case, but he never revealed where Ronald's body was hidden. This left the Penn family with only partial closure. Justice had been served in court, but the pain of not recovering his remains still lingers.